This is Dom Bettinelli, the CEO of SQPN, with a brief but very important message. For more than a decade, SQPN has produced the Catholic faith and pop culture podcasts that you love. We're a non-profit organization, so it's only your generosity that lets us carry out our mission. We haven't run a fundraiser in 2 years, and that's why we need to ask for your help right now. Please make a pledge of whatever amount you can afford to help us continue providing your favorite podcasts, as well as exciting new ones we have planned. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give. Thank you for your generosity. May we hear from you today? You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek Episode 21.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we will discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the second original series pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before. And joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going?
So I said the second original pilot. Of course, was it last time or 2 weeks ago? I forget where it is now. I've lost track of time. But we discussed The Cage. I think it was last week. We discussed The Cage, which was the first original series pilot. And
normally they didn't get a second, but they thought The Cage was too cerebral, so they said, why don't you make another one? We'll throw more money at you.
Right. And so now we're going to talk about that second one. And a lot happened in between those two. So this was one important thing to note about this episode, just to right off the bat, is it was the second pilot, but it wasn't one of the first two episodes aired of the series. In fact, it was the third episode. It aired September 22nd, 1966. And it was the third episode aired, which would have been, for people watching at the time, would have been very confusing because it was the ship looked different. There was different, on the sets where the bridge had some different stuff, different uniforms. Mm-hmm. And the different crew, when the first two episodes aired, Mr. Spock was the first officer, and then suddenly there's this one, and then there's Gary Mitchell's the first. So I can imagine how confusing it would have been, especially in the time before social media and all that other ways for fans to get information. I guess you must have just been used to stuff being weird like that.
Yeah, well, you could have always assumed this is an alternate universe or something this week.
Yeah, I don't know if that was quite in the lingo at the time, but
no, they not only in rarefied circles, but it would have been weird, and TV execs just didn't care too much. They had hours to fill.
Exactly.
And one of the reasons they did that was they saw they aired Mantrap and Charlie X before this one.
Yeah,
because
there were.
Go ahead.
And there was controversy about that behind the scenes because Mantrap, which is the salt vampire episode, was not meant to be the premiere episode, but the network, we want a monster to go out the gate with. So
right.
That was the first monster they had.
Right. And again, they thought that this second pilot was still a little too wordy and expository, which is just, TV execs.
And I don't think they've changed, so that's the problem.
Right, exactly.
They're still too...
Well, now they have all kinds of other stupid requirements of TV shows. But so anyway, so one of the interesting things I found out was that after they rejected The Cage, Desilu Studios and Roddenberry offered 3 possible scripts for the second pilot, which was this one, Omega Glory, and Mud's Women. Interestingly enough, that Omega Glory and Mud's Women were written by Roddenberry. This one was the one that was not written by Roddenberry.
And I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best of the three because Mud's Woman is actually pretty good, but Omega Glory is terrible. Yeah. But each one of these like kind of displays Gene Roddenberry's proclivities. Because in this one we have another man against God story,
right?
Which is one of Roddenberry's recurring themes. In Mud's Women, it's the Space Hookers episode, and so it's Gene Roddenberry's sexual fantasies. And then Omega Glory is Gene Roddenberry gets to speechify about the good of mankind, because that's the one where they find the planet where it's a parallel world and they have an American flag, and with the comms, the Chinese communists have taken over America, and it's a weird political allegory.
I think wasn't that Man in the High Castle? Oh, never mind. That's a different
similar. Yeah.
So the other interesting behind the scenes, sort of prelude to us discussing the actual episode is that William Shatner was the third choice for Kirk, and that they first considered Jack Lord from Hawaii Five-0 and the actor Lloyd Bridges, who has done a lot of different things. Wasn't he
Journey Beneath the Sea?
Journey Beneath the Sea, yeah.
Sequest, whatever it was, yeah.
Yeah. He had proven ability in this genre, which is it's a similar enough genre. And Jack Lord was, Jack Lord, but very interesting choice.
Book 'em Spock.
What's that?
Yeah, Book 'em Spock.
Book 'em Spock. Exactly.
I for all of Shatner's flaws, which he's not the world's greatest actor. I think as Kirk, I think almost everyone agrees he's good. He's Kirk.
Yeah, he is, and he had a history in sci-fi too. He appeared in several Twilight Zones and things like that. Right. Also, other people connected with Star Trek had worked with Roddenberry before in his first series that he produced, The Lieutenant. So the first officer in this, Gary Mitchell, is played by Gary Lockwood, who was the lieutenant. He was the star of Roddenberry's previous show that got canceled due to Roddenberry being a jerk. Which is also what would happen to Star Trek. Yep. Also, Majel Barrett and Leonard Nimoy and Nichelle Nichols were all in The Lieutenant as well. So a lot of them came on over to Star Trek after that series. And there's even, I've seen a clip of an episode of The Lieutenant that has Gary Lockwood and Majel Barrett and Leonard Nimoy all in the same scene, where Leonard Nimoy is playing this kind of fast-talking agent in a hotel room, making deals over the telephone.
That's great. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Leonard Nimoy was in Mission Impossible, the series too, right? He did
after
some of those.
Star Trek.
After Star Trek. Okay, right. I was trying to get the order of that right. So speaking of the cast, a couple of cast members that will be in the final cast are not here yet. No Nichelle Nichols yet. Uhura.
No DeForest Kelly.
And no DeForest Kelly. There's Dr. Piper, another older guy.
And I was going to comment on that. The doctor, he must have had something where he wanted an older doctor, because both pilots, it had an older doctor. And I don't know if he picked DeForest Kelly because he looks older than he is, or what. But
in fact, DeForest Kelly was his first choice, like from the first pilot, and had been overruled twice. And so they ended up getting these two other guys. And finally, they gave in and they said, okay, you can have DeForest Kelly. And, it turns out he was right.
A breakout character.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it was interesting too. Sulu was a section chief. He wasn't the helmsman.
He was an astrophysicist.
What a demotion.
I know.
What did he do to get that? I'm busting you back to KP. I mean, something must have happened.
Exactly.
Well, it's funny in a lot of the extra material, like the books and the other things like that, because they want to reconcile all the problems in the various things.
Yeah, and
they've talked
your
about
area,
that.
Dom.
That is my area, yes. But they've talked about they reconciled Sulu's career as he was a scientist originally, and ended up deciding he wanted to get into the command track, and had to take that sort of a semi-demotion or at best a lateral move into the command department, and that meant he had to be a helmsman. Hey, it worked for him. He ended up becoming captain of the Excelsior. So
Exactly.
that seemed to be a good career move.
Got to get that red shirt on if you want to, or gold shirt on if you want to.
Exactly.
Want to rise.
Speaking of red shirts, there was no red shirts.
There are no red shirts yet. Yes, we have blue shirts and we have gold shirts and some kind of beige shirt, which is not all that different. Or it could be just the fabric. It's supposed to be gold, but looked beige. I'm glad they went for red eventually. So, and that's actually a good point. We're still not in the final uniforms yet. We still get this sweater type of uniform shirt.
Velour looking stuff.
Yeah, not quite as heavy as in the Cage, but we're getting there, and they're still working out the uniforms.
It is interesting though that there is so much that's recognizable for the rest of the series. But yet there are things like the uniforms and some of the sets, like you notice there, the hallway in the original pilot, had kind of more of a V-shaped ceiling.
Right.
And you see one place where one of those ceilings or those arches show up.
Yeah.
In this pilot.
They've also redone the bridge a little bit, whereas before it seemed like almost everybody had a Luxo lamp monitor sitting on their station. Now only Kirk does, coming out of the command chair.
Yep, and then that'll go away soon. The other thing I noticed about the sets is they had color schemes. Like they had much more color in this pilot than they will eventually have in the production, which is interesting that they get rid of the color, which I wonder if that has to do more with the transition in technology at the time from black and white to color TV. While it was highly touted as, in color, living color or Technicolor, whatever the NBC thing was, that's a lot of people still had black and white TVs and maybe the colors didn't come across very well.
By any chance, Dom, were you watching the remastered edition of this episode? Because they've pumped up the color in a lot of the remastered episodes.
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay, yes. I was watching the Netflix.
If the outside scenes of the ship look CGI, because they're the remastered CGI.
Yeah, I mean the exterior special effects were much more modern, much better.
Okay.
In the original, where the rooms, did the rooms have color schemes? Like was sick bay green?
Yeah, they were, but it didn't come across as well on film or television as it would today. It actually, there was a I forget the gentleman's name, but the lighting director was considered revolutionary at the time for what he did, because we all have memories growing up of seeing Star Trek with those purples and blues and greens in the background.
Yeah.
And that was just Star Trek. Nothing else did that. This one guy had the idea because he was trying to go for a cinematic level of color saturation. And on a TV budget, the only way he had to do it was use these color gel sheets over big lights.
Okay.
And that was how they did the alien planet atmospheres and the walls of different ships and buildings.
Right.
And it was a kind of low budget way of trying to achieve high level color saturation.
And which would be extremely difficult because the NTSC color standard at the time, the broadcast color standard at the time, yes, it was in color, but it wasn't by much. I mean, compared to what we're used to, I mentioned this with when we talked about the animated series, where there are certain things that we can see now because of our high definition, high quality TVs. Well, color is one of those things. The color capabilities of our modern 21st century flat panels is light years, pun intended, of from what those TVs back in the 60s could produce. I mean, it was still revolutionary for the time, the color that they could produce, but we would look at them today and they would look very muted, very blah, almost like this is just a step above black and white, because it frankly was.
Right. Right. That's true. So speaking of the special effects, I just want to bring up one other element from behind the scenes is apparently the special effects on these two pilots caused the head of the special effects company they were using, Howard Anderson Company, caused him to have 3 nervous breakdowns. The poor guy, Daryl Anderson, there's a story that's told that, the stress of trying to bring these new opticals in on time and on budget, just like drove him nuts. In fact, when at one point Bob Justman and Gene Roddenberry, went to the company, said, "Hey, how's it going? We need the new title sequence soon." And the guy kind of just jumped to his feet screaming, "You'll never make your first air date!" And he burst into tears and ran out of the room screaming.
Whoa.
And the poor guy, they had to they sent him to Palm Springs for a rest and recuperation period. And
Wow.
then they composed the title sequence from stuff that they'd already shot. So, but this was, so, I mean, what it tells you is the special effects were so cutting edge that it was really driving these guys to the edge.
And this one has a lot of special effects. We've got the reversed out weirdness when Dr. Daner and Gary Mitchell are zapping each other. We've got the phaser rifle. We've got the energy barrier at the edge of the galaxy. We've got all these spaceships and planet shots for the first time. Yep. So there's lots of stuff going on.
It was very heavy on all of that stuff. So, yeah. So let's go ahead.
I was going to say, just on a more practical level, though, you talked about the practical effects. The tinfoil contacts could not have been comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I have a feeling that Gary Lockwood couldn't see anything. I have a feeling that they blinded him. If you look closely, there are little pinpricks, little cutouts. So they could see, but they'd only see this little tiny perspective. Because he kind of looked around as if he couldn't really see much or anything, which actually helped with making him seem weird and otherworldly. Yeah. So. Yeah.
For people who don't know what we're talking about, when the ship starts to leave the galaxy, they go through an energy barrier that causes people with psychic powers to develop godlike psychic powers, and also makes their eyes silver. Yeah, yeah. We could talk about the premise, which is that the Enterprise is heading toward the edge of the galaxy. And there's apparently some kind of galactic barrier, which never, it comes up again, I think, in original series. It does.
And then I think it comes up in Next Gen, but gets explained away as a local phenomenon as opposed to something that surrounds the entire galaxy, because there is no actual barrier at the edge of our galaxy.
Well, so far as we know, and presumably not, and we don't see them around other galaxies. So this is just a bit of imagination.
Right.
It's interesting, but there's this big pink ribbon around the edge of the galaxy that the Enterprise is flying towards, and it's like, why don't you just fly over it?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Or under it, for that matter. Also, this is kind of striking, given and a little inconsistent with what we later learn about the geography of the Star Trek galaxy, or the astrography of the Star Trek galaxy, because they're only 10. There are only a few. I mean, they go right up to the edge of the galaxy to go through this barrier. Well, our galaxy is like 100,000 light years wide. We're 20,000 light years from the center, and that means the whole thing is, the radius of the galaxy is like 50,000 light years. We're 20,000 from the center. That means they've traveled 30,000 light years from Earth,
right,
to get to this barrier, which is farther than to the center of the galaxy, and that's just way off scale from what they later establish.
If there's one thing that Star Trek has been really bad at through every series and every movie is time and distance, the time it takes to travel distances. And the one series that really makes a big deal out of it is, of course, Voyager. We've got to travel, 75,000 light years, and it'll take us 70 years or something like that. So we get this. Okay. So a ship traveling, at maximum cruising speed, not necessarily maximum cruising speed, can maybe travel 1,000 light years a year. But then we get things like, people traveling from Bajor to Earth in a couple days, and and then the J.J. Abrams reboot, we're bopping around the galaxy in a couple hours.
They blink an eye and they're there.
Right.
Yeah.
That's, as someone who's really into I'm almost obsessive about the technology details. It's just from my childhood. Really,
almost.
It really drove me nuts. It still does, actually. I'll be honest. It drives me nuts when they're not consistent. Like, at least be consistent.
To go to the edge of the galaxy and back, the opening narration should have said, these are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. It's 65-year mission.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly.
Except there is no opening narration yet.
Yes.
That's you get no just music over the credits, and only Shatner and Nimoy are listed.
Right.
That's one nice thing, at least, of course, we do Secrets of Doctor Who. At least with Doctor Who, they just kind of go wibbly wobbly, timely wimey. It's, wave a hand at it and it's gone. And it's just, that's a part of the show. It's expected.
The way they establish the technology is that they can travel nearly instantaneously to any time or place. And if we'd done that with Star Trek, that would have been better. But even within this episode, they talk about our warp engines are out. It's going to take us decades to get home. Okay, right, yeah. I get that. All right. I mean, even then, that's not. It's kind of ridiculous because if you're traveling below the speed of light, it's not decades; it's generations.
It is the risk, though, with science fiction like this. They didn't plan on Star Trek being a 50+ year.
Yes.
World, that it was going to be this series that was going to hopefully run for a few years and make lots of money and everybody would enjoy it, and and they'd be happy, and that would be it. Well, and they go on to another series.
Right. In their defense, I have to point. They don't actually say in this episode how fast the ship can travel. I mean, there's nothing has been established how that maybe warp speed means you can go 1,000 light years in a day. I mean, it's never been established. So they didn't think of that ahead of time, and like you said, they didn't plan out that we'd have to do this for decades. So we should be really strict about it. I get that. It's just me being annoying fan.
Yeah.
So
let's talk plot.
Yes.
In this episode, it starts just the way the previous pilot started, with them hunting for a lost ship. It's like, wow, another lost ship premise. The first one had crashed on a planet. This one had gone beyond the edge of the galaxy. This one was 2 centuries ago. It was called the Valiant. And they beam aboard what's essentially its black box to find out what happened to it. But before that, we get a scene with Kirk and Spock playing 3D chess. And Spock thinks he's got Kirk cornered, and then Kirk pulls a surprise move and upsets Spock. And we have some interesting background on Spock. At one point, Kirk says, before he pulls a surprise move, "You play a very irritating game of chess, Mr. Spock." And Spock says, "Irritating? Ah, yes, one of your Earth emotions." And
because apparently there are emotions that are unique to Earth.
Yeah, and also, but apparently not all emotions are unique to Earth, because smugness and happiness and self-satisfaction are apparently Vulcan emotions. As he says that,
I know, he's got this little smile on his face as he says it. It was really funny.
And then when Kirk pulls the surprise move, he says, "You still don't know what irritation is, Mr. Spock?" And Mr. Spock says, "The fact that one of my ancestors married a human female," and then he gets cut off. Yeah. And so notice, so they're establishing Spock has mixed racial heritage, but it's just one of my ancestors. It's not mom at this point.
Yes, that's a good point. I like Kirk's response, by the way. Terrible having bad blood like that.
Yeah. So apparently either they hadn't decided on it being Spock's mother yet, although they will very quickly in the next couple of episodes. Yep. Or honor your father and mother is not one of the 10 commandments on Vulcan, because he would be totally dissing his mom as just one of my ancestors.
Right. So, and as was established, Spock is not the first officer at this point. In fact,
science officer, yeah.
Yes, he's science officer, and Gary Mitchell, who is apparently navigator, is the first officer, and he's a friend of Kirk's going way back, and he's sort of very much like Will Riker will be in Next Gen. He's sort of a bit of a ladies' man, a funny guy, friendly jokes, that sort of thing.
Yeah. He also like as part of the ladies' man kind of thing. At one point, after they introduced the Dr. Daner character, he's like walking freezer unit.
Yeah, that was uncomfortable. That's sort of uncomfortable to me to see that today. It's a different times have changed a lot. And they're on the bridge. I gotta like another one of my pet peeves is the tendency in all science fiction TV shows and movies for people in the scene to state obvious things. Put the screen on, the captain says. Screen on, sir. Like, okay, I can see that.
Get Spock barking orders again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I can see that the screen is on. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah. So they call all the department heads to the bridge as in preparation for this crossing the barrier, and then there's this discussion about ESP and extrasensory perception as a serious science.
Yeah, we should mention that this is the point at which Dr. Mark Piper, the head of life sciences, introduces Dr. Elizabeth Daner, who he says her specialty is psychiatry, and she's here because she's doing a study on crew reactions in emergencies.
Right.
And so she's not like regularly assigned to the ship. She's here for that particular purpose. And so I guess they're already anticipating trouble, that this is going to be an emergency with leaving the galaxy. Yeah. But Spock starts processing the tapes from the black box from the Valiant and discovers that the captain of the Valiant, after they crossed the barrier, was having like frantic Google searches for ESP in human beings. And so, looking at his search history, they're wondering what that can all mean.
Right.
And as they go through the barrier, we see Daner and Mitchell both get zapped in a special way that other people aren't. And it later emerges that Dr. Daner has an ESP rating they don't say this on screen. They don't say it out loud, but we see it in her like Pica typewriter type records on the screen.
That someone took a picture of and put in the database.
Yep.
Yeah. She's got an ESP rating of 89, which is apparently high. And Mitchell has an ESP rating 2 points higher at 91.
Yeah.
And that's why they're able to that's why they get zapped in a special way. You're right, Dom. They explain that this is that ESP, although Kirk doesn't seem to be overly familiar with it. I mean, he knows about it, but it's treated as a serious science. And in this episode, in humans, later Vulcan mind melds will become a thing.
Right.
Right.
So
and they kind of hinted something. There would be something more in the future because he says basically, or Spock says something. It's like, well, there's ESP that you don't know about, or something to that extent. So they hint that there could be more in the future.
Yeah, in this episode, Daner explains it by saying it is a fact that some people can sense future happenings, read the backs of playing cards, and so on, but the Esper capacity is always quite limited until you cross the barrier at the edge of the galaxy. In view of the fact, though, that they're later going to establish Spock has much more dramatic ESP powers with the Vulcan mind meld, it's like he should have been a number one zap guy going through that barrier, and he's not. So it's kind of a plot hole. Why doesn't this affect Spock the way it does Mitchell and Daner?
I mean, I suppose you could say Vulcans probably because their telepathy is as such a part of who they are that they've developed ways to protect themselves from telepathic or extrasensory shock or something along those lines, I suppose.
Maybe, or it may just be the fact that Spock's earpiece has a wire connecting it to the console in this episode that keeps him grounded.
Yes, he apparently reads through his ears, which is interesting. So
one thing real quick, talking about Dr. Daner, she was played by Sally Kellerman, who is known as Hot Lips Houlihan from MASH. That's what most people know her as.
I didn't realize that was her. Wow. She looks so different
from the movie, not from the series.
No, same actor, same actress.
Right, it's not Loretta Swit. Okay,
yeah.
Loretta Swit's the TV one.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, that's why she doesn't look familiar.
Yeah, no, Loretta Swit. Yeah.
So, so I was kind of want to move through the plot is fairly straightforward, but there are some points we'll want to bring out. Kind of interesting. So once they go through, Mitchell, 9 people die straight out. Mitchell and Dana are affected, and Mitchell begins to exhibit some effects, most notably physically. His eyes start glowing. They turn silver essentially. Yep. In one of the fade outs to commercial, they have this where it's on his eyes, and the last thing to fade out is his glowing eyes, which I just thought was a nice effect. That was kind of nice.
He also develops the ability to read preternaturally fast and to telekinetically move coffee cups.
And he knows when people are coming in and out of the room before they arrive, and then starts to be able to read minds. At one point, he's trying to hit on Dr. Dana again. Daner, sorry, that's my Boston accent coming out. Dr. Daner again, and he recites to her the Nightingale poem. Which
from Tarbold,
which turns out was actually written by Gene Roddenberry about not a woman, about his World War II airplane.
Well, okay.
But he has Mitchell call it one of the most passionate of all love sonnets of all time, which I just think it's either Sam Peoples putting a dig in on Roddenberry or Roddenberry digging on himself a little bit there. But I just thought it was funny. So as we progress, everyone gets concerned about the changes in Mitchell. He's becoming a little bit, megalomaniacal and a little bit concerning. And Dr. Kellerman is his advocate. And in fact, I feel like she's overly familiar and overly emotional about Mitchell, and then also exhibits some sort of Nietzschean eugenics attitudes about improving the species. Very uncomfortable with Dr. Daner in this episode here.
Now, to be fair, that could be the effect of the ESP boost as it's showing up in her.
That's true.
Yeah, there's also other things that, like, there's a moment where Kirk is talking to Mitchell, and Mitchell gets annoyed, and all of a sudden his voice starts to echo.
Yes.
And Kirk doesn't immediately order tests to find out what's going on with this echo voice.
That's quite a tricky
kind of ignores
there, Gary.
Yeah.
Are you a ventriloquist of some sort? How do you do that? And whereas, in contrast to Daner, Spock is very cold toward Mitchell. In fact, he's like,
kill this guy now.
Basically.
Exactly.
This guy's now a threat. Let's get rid of him. Kill him.
Take him to the nearest airlock, eject him. We're done with him. Goodbye.
Do not serve on an all Vulcan starship. That's all I'm saying. Just don't do it. So, one of the things that interests me, one of the questions that I have is why does Mitchell turn on his friends? Is it a part of his nature coming out, or does this ESP create it in him? What is that turning?
Yeah, and I'm not saying this is psychologically plausible, but it's basically what they're doing is the power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely theme. So now that Gary Mitchell has absolute power, he's become absolutely corrupted. And they imply the same thing will happen to Dr. Daner in time. She's just farther behind on the curve than Mitchell is. And so she needs to take him down while she still has self-possession.
Right. Yeah. So it's the idea that power, as someone gets more and more power, they become less compassionate and less.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that, which may, or like you said, may or may not actually be true, but has been borne out in some episodes in history.
Yeah. And in human terms, certainly the more power people are raised with, they can come across as, above everybody else and less concerned.
That's true.
But from a Christian perspective, we'd say actually ultimate power in the true sense is also ultimate love, because God is love.
Right. And of course that comes up, whereas Gary Mitchell starts to think of himself as a god, right down to the point where
says it out loud.
Yes, although he ends up offering an apple to Dr. Daner, which is an interesting.
Ooh, I saw what they did there.
Is he a god or is he the devil? He offers that sort of the temptation comes, and in fact, it was very interesting that The Cage had an Adam and an Eve, and this episode has an Adam and an Eve. That theme has repeated in both of these pilots. Again, another echo of something that seems to be that Gene Roddenberry is going back to in this. So they've put Mitchell on this mining planet, this mining station. They're going to strand him there at this place
ships only come every 20 years to get dilithium or whatever.
That's going to be one heck of a business plan for that mining company. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's some long-term planning. Anyway, but interesting. And then a couple things that come up. Mitchell says, morals are from men, not gods. Very interesting statement there. Obviously, not said in a positive sense. That we're supposed to say that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that's Nietzschean, the idea that the Uberman, the Superman, has superior morality and is not bound by conventional morals that are made by the lower class, the slave mentality to rein in the will of the Superman.
I'm not going to say that Roddenberry is making a Nazi analogy here, or the Nazi, because that would be too simplistic. But from a standpoint of America of that time, as having all the men at least making this series are old enough that they probably served in World War II. That there was probably an undercurrent, even just a subconscious reaction against Nietzschean thinking, the sort of thing that the Nazis epitomized.
Yeah. Now, we should point out Nietzsche was kind of appropriated by the Nazis after his death. And even Nietzsche himself scholars will say, was somewhat misrepresented because he went crazy and died very young.
Yeah.
And his sister then published a bunch of notes he had and edited them. And there's always been this controversy about how much of that is actually Nietzsche's thought. And and so even though the Nazis have tarnished Nietzsche beyond what he would otherwise deserve, there's always been this question about exactly how much Nietzsche would have gone along with some of with the way he was later appropriated.
It's a good point.
It's also interesting. He's not actually mentioned in this episode, even though his thought seems quite present here. The philosopher that is mentioned is Spinoza, Benedict Spinoza, kind of early modern period Jewish philosopher who Gary Mitchell has been reading and describes as very simple, childlike, really. And I don't know if you've ever read Spinoza, but I can see that.
Oh no, Father Corey, we gotta strand Jimmy on a mining station.
Yeah, exactly.
So a couple other things. The episode reached its climax with Kirk having to, as the captain and as Mitchell's friend, he feels it's his responsibility to take out Mitchell, to remove him as the threat. He takes it very personally. This is very characteristic of Captain Kirk that we'll come to see, whereas he takes that responsibility on himself.
Even though they could end the problem from orbit using planetary extermination by neutron radiation,
right?
Which is the phrase they use, which actually would work. I mean, that would kill everything, and so they could do that, but instead we get a personal confrontation between Kirk and Mitchell. And just like we got to see a laser cannon in the previous pilot, now we get to see a phaser rifle.
Yep.
Yes, Spock gets that. He pulls out that phaser rifle, and he's got it like, I'm ready to rock and roll.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Like
Kirk,
a Tommy gun or something.
Did you get this? That I didn't order. Oh yeah, we did.
You saw it. Yeah, Spock walks up. Oh, I got it here. We also get the first ripped uniform shirt on Kirk in this episode in his fight with Mitchell. We have Mitchell with the, just like all supervillains, has the overly elaborate plan to kill Kirk, where he telekinetically creates a grave with a gravestone that he's going to drop Kirk into.
Even though he's known him for 15 years, he doesn't know Kirk's middle initial because it says James R. Kirk on the tombstone.
Exactly. Well, the fans have come up with an explanation for that too. It was an in joke between Gary Mitchell and Kirk at the Academy. It was some kind of, they came up with some kind of weird nickname for him or something like that. But very funny. And so it was not just by dint of brawn, on Kirk's part, but also by his persuasion of Dr. Daner to reject Gary Mitchell's temptation in that temptation in the desert of that planet, if I may.
Notice the reversal. In Adam accepted Eve's temptation, and here Eve rejects Adam's temptation.
Exactly. Yes. And it's by their combination that they drop Gary into Kirk's grave and drop the giant rock on him that apparently squishes him, that he's not able to stop from falling on him.
Telekinetically
squished like a bug. So and then we wrap up the episode like that. I mean, that's pretty much quickly. I'm trying to remember if there was anything significant. I didn't write a note about anything post that.
Even though this episode explores Roddenberry's obsession, which writers on the show talked about later, obsession with taking down God, we do have an interesting line in here at one point that indicates that Gary Mitchell is, not really God, and which of course is obvious, but that Kirk says at one point, above all, a God needs compassion. And so there is a recognition on the part of the script that that true divinity is something that's going to involve compassion, or that at least needs to, and that what Gary Mitchell has is just a counterfeit.
Right. The episode does end on the bridge. It's actually a visual that will become a sort of a hallmark of the series, where the captain is back in his chair giving a captain's log, and he notes that Dr. Daner and Gary Mitchell are both lost on the performance of duty. So because
Daner dies for no real reason except on the plot level. She's like expended herself too much in taking Mitchell down, so she dies just as she's giving birth to Luke and Leia or whatever.
Oh, sorry, wrong one. And then
exactly.
So Kirk, wants to emphasize that they didn't ask for what happened to them, that sort of thing. Spock says, I felt for him too, sort of bookending the episode from that first scene where he talked about Earth emotions, and then the end. And then
Daner also had a line in there saying, "I know people from your planet don't have feelings the way we do." Right, and that the way we do could be taken either to mean at all or in a human fashion. Right.
There's an interesting sort of. Some may call it an anti-Vulcan attitude in Kirk, where Spock is only good if he starts to display human emotions. People have noted that throughout the original series was Kirk, and especially McCoy, the Vulcan desire not to show emotion is a flaw from their human point of view, as opposed to just granting them that this is the way they want to be.
Well, it does, and it's understandable, even though you could look at that and say, ooh, that's culturalist or speciesist or something. It's also when Spock becomes most relatable to the audience.
Right. And I think that's the balance of it, especially because Spock is half human. I mean, here he's some percentage human. We don't know yet, but eventually we realize he's half human, and that's a balance that the character ends up seeking in himself, which we will discuss a little more in detail, I think, next week when we discuss Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It would be an interesting element. And then that's it. That's how the episode ends, and we move on to the rest of the series history as we know it.
I have just one final comment on this is the second pilot, because they thought the first pilot was too cerebral.
Yeah.
But the first pilot was basically you go on a planet and aliens offer you a fantasy life.
Right.
And that's cerebral compared to all this man-God compassion stuff. This is way more cerebral.
But there's more fighting in this one.
Yeah, exactly.
Kirk, cracks Gary Mitchell one in the face. Yes, that's the. I mean, who can account for TV execs?
Yeah.
So, is there any other notes you have, Father Corey, on this episode? Jimmy, anything else? Nope. Okay, so that's it from us then. So, what do you think? What do you think of this, second original series pilot where no man has gone before? Well, we want to hear from you, so let us know by visiting sqpn.com/Trek and finding the link to this episode and putting a comment there, or going to our Facebook page, the SQPN Facebook page. Leave us some feedback there, or send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. Folks have said, hey, I don't have a Facebook page. How can I, respond to you? Email is perfectly fine. We'll read emails on future podcasts. You can also, if you have Twitter, you could respond on Twitter as well.
Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can use the comment box on YouTube.
Exactly. Any of those. There's lots of ways to respond to us. So if whatever reason you don't have a Facebook, that's fine. Please go to iTunes and Google Play and other places, Stitcher and TuneIn. Leave us reviews. Give us, the 5-star review if you can. Recommend us to your friends who are Star Trek fans. We're trying to grow an audience here, and the only way we can do that is actually through your help. You are our greatest advocates. Your recommendation makes the difference and gets more people out there. So with that said, we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing, as I said, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Until then, Father Corey Stika, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thanks.
Almost said the motion picture. Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening. And remember, my love has wings, slender feathered things, with grace in upward swept curve and tapered tip. Now, if that ain't the greatest love sonnet of all time, I don't know what is. This is Dom Bettinelli again. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and that you'll help us keep producing the podcast you love. Thank you for your generosity. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give.